Well, Jim Chalmers was so desperate to get away from the negative gearing debacle, he flew to China this week. But even there, he was unable to escape the controversy, finally being forced to assure everyone back home there was no cause for concern. He was just a treasurer, casually examining policy ideas with no particular agenda in mind. Have a listen.
It is not unusual for treasurers to do that, but we have made it very clear through the course of this week that we have a broad and ambitious housing policy already, and those changes aren't part of it.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has been attempting to clean up the mess in the way only he knows how, by making an even bigger mess. He evidently thought the best way to allay fears of tax changes was to refuse to rule out tax changes. But according to the Sydney Morning Herald, two senior government ministers have been saying that changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax could help persuade people to vote for Labor at the upcoming election. For this and more of today's top stories, I'm joined by our Friday regular, former Queensland Premier Campbell Newman. Campbell, great to have your company. Do you think changes to capital gains tax would persuade voters or turn them off, seeing this would just be another broken promise from a Prime Minister who's starting to develop a little bit of a reputation?
Look, it was quite comic to see the Prime Minister being questioned by our colleague Peter Stefanovic yesterday morning on this network and deliver the line, we have no plans. We have no plans. I mean, and Peter said, well, we've heard that before, Prime Minister. That was the gist of it. So, they have really shot themselves in the foot this week on this. And, maybe they're just a group of slow learners. Maybe they just don't get it. But there are lots of people in that middle of Australia who are using negative gearing or the prospect of a bit of a free kick on a capital gain to actually get ahead. That's not a bad thing. And what it does actually do, James, is it makes sure that we have a whole lot of small mum and dad landlords in this country who provide housing to people who need to rent. It really gets me that back in, I think it was around 87, 88, the Hawke Keating government, curtailed negative gearing at that time, and it was a disaster. Rents went through the roof. There was a reduction in the supply of rental properties. So it doesn't work. Look, the answer to this whole housing issue, James, is to deregulate. Do what Argentina has done, that new President Milei, where he's taken a whole lot of these rent controls and laws off, and suddenly there's a whole lot of housing on the market. Prices have dropped, rents have gone down, people can find accommodation. And that's in the space of only about a year. So that's what the answer is, not higher taxes.
Yeah, sadly, Campbell, Anthony Albanese is no President Milei. We could but wish. I had to laugh when he said, we have no plans, because, of course, Anthony Albanese for many months talked about we have a plan for cost of living and this, and now he doesn't have a plan. How do you think this will play out? Do you think ultimately Labor will flip-flop on this before the election?
James, they're travelling really badly. They continue to lurch from disaster to disaster. Peter Dutton, for all his supposed unpopularity, has them on the ropes. And I predict if they go ahead with this, if they don't put this one back in they've got to get the toothpaste back in the tube, by the way, so they probably aren't. But if they were to pursue this, this is the end of this is the final nail in their coffin. And I give this advice as someone who did a lot, and I'm told too much in my term, 2012 to 2015, and I got voted out. Well, guess what will happen to them? They'll be out on jet-propelled roller skates, James, if they touch this one. Leave it alone, guys. You should have learnt from 2019.
Well, can I just say, Campbell, as someone who was living in Queensland when you were Premier, you did try to do a lot, but you were trying to do a lot of good things as opposed to our current federal government. Very different situation. I want to talk to you about Queensland because the Labor Party there has been slammed for posting, quote, desperate and juvenile TikTok videos of opposition leader David Crisafulli and of yourself. In fact, in one of the videos, they've labelled you as the devil. Now, I want to talk about this a bit later, but you've threatened legal action. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, look, I don't think I'll be doing that because, frankly, it's not worth the time and effort and the money. and they've spent the best part of a decade having a go at me in this way. But what I do say is it shows great desperation, but it also is quite sinister, because this is the sort of personal vilification, that sort of targeting the individual rather than policies that we've seen in the United States to quite terrible consequences, where people are picking up weapons and trying to assassinate political candidates. The Labor Party only a few weeks ago were carrying on about cooling down the personal rhetoric, and this was in the context of sort of attacks on MPs' offices, props to do with the whole Palestinian thing, Gaza, etc. So, what don't they understand? I mean, cool it. I'm not a member of the LNP, haven't been for over 3 years now. I'm not supporting the LNP in this election per se. I'm supporting the Libertarian Party and my candidates, people like Nick Buick in my local area of Clayfield. To try and sort of tie poor old David Crisafulli to yours truly is a bit rich as well. But look, people will judge them badly for this. It's un-Australian. It's just desperate. And it's also interesting to see that Stephen Miles, who's supposedly the leader of the Labor Party in Queensland, is saying, "Oh, it's not to do with me. It's the Labor Party." Like how would Peter Dutton or Tony Abbott get away with that sort of answer to a question involving the Liberal or Liberal National parties?
Indeed. Well, I guess it's a bit of a compliment to you, Campbell, that 10 years after you were the Premier, you're still living rent-free in their heads. That these posts have been going on a page labelled Miles HQ, but Stephen Miles has distanced himself from the post, saying, no, it's nothing to do with me. Have a listen.
They're questions for the Labor Party. The content of those pages are questions for the Labor Party. And having seen some of the remarks from Fiona Simpson this morning, I'd suggest you should have a look at the LNP's page.
These are questions for the Labor Party. Mr Miles, you're the leader of the Queensland Labor Party. Shouldn't he take some responsibility?
Exactly. No, and that's what, take responsibility. I mean, Tony Abbott stood in front of someone else's sign that said ditch the witch, and we remember what happened there. But look, I'll say this to Miles. I keep saying this. If you want to continue to talk about my track record from 2012 to 2015, where we turned around the hospitals, we had the best surgery waiting times in the nation, we'd ended ambulance ramping, we had crime drop by 15 to 20%, we kicked the bikies out of the state. If you want to debate my track record and your track record, name the time. We've got 4 weeks of an election campaign. I'm prepared to front up at a mutually agreed time and location and have it out, because he won't do it, James, because his whole repartee is threadbare and tired, and they will be voted out. I'm pretty sure about that in a few weeks' time. It could be a more convincing election victory for the LNP. Happy to talk about that.
You're right, his campaign is threadbare and tired, but his TikToks, gee, they're something special. Just before I let you go, it is less than a month until the Queensland election. The latest news poll has the government headed for a wipeout with the LNP 10 points clear. Just quickly, David Crisafulli is reluctant to get too ahead of himself. Is he right to just play it cool and keep campaigning as if he's the underdog?
Yeah, look, he has to do that. And look, they're not doing well enough to absolutely wipe the Labor Party out. At the moment, I'm prepared to predict an LNP victory. But it's like this, James, their primary vote, and I always look at primary votes, 2PP is subject to all sorts of assumptions. The primary vote, according to the news poll, is 42 for the LNP. When we lost in 2015, it was 41.3. So the Labor Party are down quite significantly, about 7.5%. But a whole lot of it, about 4% of it's gone to the Greens. Of course, it's going to come back in preferences. So you see, I believe Crisafulli could win in a landslide like 2012, but it requires the articulation of a far more ambitious vision and also taking the fight a lot more vigorously to the Labor Party and pointing out, for example, the Labor Party are the people who sold state assets. They sold the Port of Brisbane. They sold Queensland Rail, and Queenslanders perhaps need to be reminded of past broken promises by the Labor Party. But the LNP don't seem to ever want to do that, mate. And so I think they'll win, but I don't think at this stage there's any cause for complacency at all.
Well, it'll be very interesting to watch what develops over the next couple of weeks. Campbell Newman, thanks so much for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, James.